The year was 1874, a freezing Tuesday in the Montana Territory. A mail-order bride named Alara Vance stepped off the stagecoach in the lawless town of Bannock to meet a man she knew only through letters. She was expecting a husband. The town was expecting a wedding. But when Alara stepped onto the dirt, she didn't come alone. Behind her, two other women stepped out, her sisters. The crowd went silent. The groom, a terrifying mountain man named Silas Thorne, stared at the three shivering women. The sheriff reached for his gun, expecting Thorne to turn violent at the deception. Instead, Silas looked them over and spoke 5 words that would haunt the Bitterroot Valley for a generation. "I'll take all 3. This isn't just a story of survival. It's the true, dark legend of Dead Man's Ridge." The stagecoach arrived in Bannock, Montana, 3 hours late, caked in the gray mud of the trail that wound up from Salt Lake City. It was late October, and the air already tasted like snow. The town itself was a scar on the landscape, a collection of hastily built wooden shacks, saloons that smelled of stale beer and sawdust, and a general feeling that civilization was merely a suggestion, not a rule. Waiting on the boardwalk of the Gold Leaf Hotel was Silas Thorne. To call Silas a mountain man was an understatement. He was a fortress of a human being. Standing 6'4", wearing a coat made from the hide of a grizzly he'd likely killed with his bare hands, Silas was a man who owned the high country. He was 40 years old, though the wind and sun had carved his face into something that looked ancient. He had a reputation in Bannock. They said he had struck a vein of gold up on Dead Man's Ridge that was thick as a man's arm, but no one dared go up there to check. The last man who did was found at the bottom of a ravine, minus his boots. Silas was there for one reason: Alara Vance. He had paid $50 to a matchmaking service in St. Louis. He needed a wife. Not for love. Silas didn't believe in softness, but because a homestead claim required a family to hold it legally against the encroaching mining corporations. He needed a name on a paper and a body to keep the fire lit while he worked the deep shafts. The stagecoach driver, a nervous man named Miller, hopped down and opened the door. "End of the line," Miller croaked. A boot, small and worn, stepped onto the slat of the coach. Then, Alara Vance emerged. She was 22, with dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that were constantly darting, assessing, calculating. She wore a faded blue dress that had seen better days. She looked at Silas, her eyes widening slightly at the sheer size of him, but she didn't flinch. Silas took a step forward, holding a crumpled letter. "Alara? Mr. Thorne?" she said. Her voice was steady. Too steady. Silas nodded. "Parson is ready. We marry within the hour. We ride out before sunset." "Wait," Alara said. She didn't move toward him. Instead, she turned back to the open door of the stagecoach. From the shadows of the carriage, another girl stepped out. She was younger, maybe 18, with the same dark hair, but a terrified expression. This was Sarah. The onlookers on the porch of the saloon stopped drinking. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Then, a third girl emerged. Ruth. She couldn't have been more than 16, clutching a ragged doll that looked like it had been dragged through a war zone. Silas stopped. His hand, large and calloused, drifted instinctively toward the Colt Navy revolver strapped to his hip. The air in the street grew heavy. "What is this?" Silas rumbled. The sound was like rocks grinding together. "I sent for a wife. One wife." Alara stepped in front of her sisters. shielding them with her small frame. "We come as a package, Mr. Thorne. Our parents died of the fever in Missouri. I couldn't leave them to the orphanage. They would have been separated. I assumed a man of your means could afford the extra mouths." It was a lie. Silas could smell it. It smelled like fear. These girls weren't just orphans. They were running. The dust on their clothes wasn't just travel dust. It was the dust of flight. Sheriff Josiah Black, a man who had been watching from the rocking chair of the depot, stood up. He spit a stream of tobacco onto the dirt. "Looks like you got swindled, Thorne," the sheriff laughed, though his eyes were cold. "You want me to put the other two on the next coach back east? Or maybe they can find work at the saloon. I'm sure Big Molly has room for fresh girls." At the mention of the saloon, Sarah whimpered. Ilara's hand went to her pocket, and Silas saw the outline of a small derringer there. She was ready to shoot the sheriff to keep her sisters out of that place. Silas looked at Ilara. He saw the desperation, but he also saw the steel in her spine. He looked at Sarah, who was trembling but standing her ground. He looked at Ruth, the youngest. Silas needed a wife for the claim, but up on Dead Man's Ridge, winter was coming. The work was brutal. He didn't just need a wife. He needed a crew. He needed eyes in the back of his head, and he knew what it was like to be hunted. He looked at the sheriff, then back to Ilara. The town held its breath. "Get your bags," Silas said. Ilara blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said get your bags," Silas repeated, his voice flat. "The wagon is out back. I have supplies to load." "You're sending us back?" Ilara asked, her voice cracking for the first time. Silas turned his back on them, walking toward the livery stables. He threw the words over his shoulder, loud enough for the sheriff and every gossip in Bannock to hear. "No. I have 3 cabins up on the ridge that need sweeping. I paid for a bride. I got a workforce. I'll take all 3. The sheriff's jaw dropped. "You can't marry 3 women, Thorne. That's bigamy." "I'm marrying one," Silas growled, stopping and turning his head. His eyes were like chips of flint. "The other 2 are hired help. Unless you want to pay their fare back to St. Louis, Sheriff." The sheriff fell silent. He wasn't going to spend a dime. Ilara let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 1,000 miles. She grabbed Sarah's hand. "Let's go." As they loaded their meager trunks into Silas's heavy-duty supply wagon, Ilara caught Silas watching them. He wasn't looking at them with lust or kindness. He was looking at them the way a general looks at new recruits before a suicide mission. "Don't thank me," Silas muttered, as he tossed a 50-pound sack of flour into the wagon as if it were a pillow. "Where we're going, you might wish you'd stayed in the saloon." The journey up to Dead Man's Ridge took 2 days. It wasn't a road. It was a goat trail carved into the side of a granite mountain. As the elevation climbed, the trees turned from ponderosa pine to twisted, ancient firs. The air grew thin and bit at their lungs. Ilara sat on the buckboard seat next to Silas, while her sisters huddled under blankets in the back. For the first 6 hours, Silas didn't say a word. He drove the mules with expert precision, guiding the heavy wagon over rocks that would have shattered a lesser vehicle. "Why?" Ilara asked finally. The sun was dipping below the peaks, casting long purple shadows across the snow-dusted trail. "Why what?" Silas asked, eyes on the trail. "Why did you take us? You don't seem like a man who likes charity." Silas cracked the reins. "I don't. Charity is for people who can afford to lose money." "Then why?" Silas glanced at her. You were reaching for a gun when the sheriff spoke. A Derringer, pocket model. Probably a .41 rimfire. Ilara stiffened. I don't know what you mean. I know a cornered animal when I see one, Mrs. Thorne, Silas said. They had been married by the town drunkard of a parson in a 3-minute ceremony before leaving. And I know you aren't running to me. You're running from someone. Who is it? Ilara stayed silent. The wind howled through the canyon. Doesn't matter, Silas said. Whatever is chasing you, it can't climb this high. Not in winter. They arrived at the homestead on the evening of the second day. Ilara had expected a cabin. What she saw was something else entirely. It was a compound. Built against a sheer rock face, the main cabin was constructed of massive logs, fit together so tightly a knife blade couldn't pass between them. The windows were narrow, like arrow slits, and covered with heavy iron shutters. There was a high fence made of sharpened logs surrounding the perimeter. Is this a home or a prison? Sarah whispered from the back of the wagon. It's a fortress, Silas said, climbing down. Inside. Now. The interior was warm, heated by a massive stone fireplace, but it was Spartan. Tools, weapons, and maps covered the walls. There were no curtains, no rugs, no softness. Listen to me, Silas said, standing in the center of the room. He looked larger in the firelight. There are rules here. Break them, and you die. Not because I'll kill you, but because the mountain will. The 3 sisters stood in a row, trembling. Rule 1, Silas counted on a finger. You never leave the perimeter of the fence without me. There are wolves, bears, and cougars, and they are the nice things out there. Rule 2, the door is barred at sundown. It does not open until sunrise. No matter what you hear outside, screaming, crying, scratching, you do not open that door. Ruth clutched her doll tighter. What screams? Silas ignored her. Rule 3. You see that door? He pointed to a heavy oak door at the back of the cabin, reinforced with iron bands and a heavy padlock. That is the supply room and the mine entrance. You do not touch it. You do not look at it. You do not ask about it. Am I clear? Yes, Ilara said, her voice hard. She wasn't intimidated by rules. She was used to surviving. Good, Silas said. There's a loft upstairs. That's where you 3 sleep. I sleep down here by the door. You aren't expecting me to share your bed? Ilara asked, surprised. He was her husband, after all. By law, he had the right. Silas laughed, a dry, humorless sound. I didn't buy a wife for pleasure, Ilara. I bought a partner. I have work to do, heavy work, and I need someone to cook and clean so I don't waste daylight doing it myself. You 3 keep the house running. I keep the gold flowing. That's the deal. For the first few weeks, life fell into a brutal rhythm. Silas was gone before dawn, disappearing into the locked room at the back of the cabin. The sisters would hear the faint ringing of a pickaxe deep underground. The cabin was built right over the mine shaft entrance. Ilara, Sarah, and Ruth worked harder than they ever had in their lives. They chopped wood, hauled water from the spring inside the perimeter, and cooked stews from dried venison and beans. But the isolation began to wear on them. The wind never stopped screaming. And Silas was changing. He became more paranoid. He would spend hours cleaning his rifles, staring out the arrow-slit windows at the empty trail. He stopped eating with them, taking his plate to the locked door and eating while sitting against it, as if guarding it from his own wives. One night in mid-November, a blizzard struck. The cabin shook under the assault of the wind. Ilara couldn't sleep. She climbed down the ladder from the loft to get a drink of water. The fire had burned down to embers. She saw Silas. He wasn't asleep by the front door. He was standing by the locked door at the back. The padlock was open. Ilara froze in the shadows. Silas pushed the heavy door open. He didn't go in. Instead, he pulled something out, a heavy wooden crate. He dragged it into the firelight. He pried the lid open. Ilara stifled a gasp. It wasn't gold. The crate was filled with rifles. Brand new, military-grade Henry repeaters. And underneath them, dynamite. Sticks and sticks of dynamite. Silas wasn't mining gold. He was preparing for a war. Suddenly, Silas stopped. He didn't turn around, but his hand went to the knife at his belt. "You have light feet, Ilara," he whispered. "But not light enough." He turned slowly. The firelight caught the blade in his hand. "I told you never to look at that door." Ilara stepped into the light, her chin high. "And I told you, I'm not just a wife. If we're going to die up here, Silas, I want to know who's coming to kill us." Silas stared at her for a long moment. Then he sheathed the knife. He kicked the crate shut. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the rough-hewn table. "Pour us some whiskey. It's time you knew why the mail order service sent you to a ghost." He sat opposite her, the storm raging outside. "I'm not Silas Thorne," he said quietly. "Silas Thorne died 5 years ago in a prison camp in Andersonville. I took his name. And the gold I'm looking for? It isn't in the ground." "Where is it?" Ilara asked. "It was stolen," he said. "From the Confederate Treasury. A wagon train disappeared in '65. I was the one who hid it. And the men I hid it from, the men who killed my unit to get to it, they just found out I'm alive." Ilara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the blizzard. "Who are they?" "The Pinkertons," he said, "and a rogue general named Calloway. They don't want to arrest me, Ilara. They want to skin me alive until I tell them where the treasure is." He leaned forward. "I didn't take you and your sisters to be maids. I took you because when they come, and they will come, I can't shoot in 3 directions at once. Can your sisters shoot?" Ilara thought of the way Sarah had handled the rabbits in Missouri. She thought of Ruth's steady hands. "Yes," Ilara said, "we can shoot." "Good," Silas said, "because the snow is falling, and when the snow stops, the tracks will lead them right to our door." The snow didn't stop for 3 days. It buried the world in white, erasing the trail back to Bannock, erasing the horizon, erasing hope. Inside the fortress of a cabin, the air was thick with the smell of gun oil and tension. Silas Thorne was a hard teacher. He didn't yell. He didn't scold. He simply expected perfection, and when he didn't get it, he made them start over. "Again," Silas grunted. They were in the main room. The heavy shutters were barred, but Silas had set up targets, empty tin cans, on the far wall of the log structure. He had removed the powder from the cartridges, teaching them the mechanics of the reload before he let them fire a live round. Ruth, the 16-year-old, struggled with the weight of the Henry rifle. It was heavy, the wood stock scarred, the metal cold against her cheek. Her small hands fumbled with the lever action. "You're jamming it," Silas said, stepping in. He didn't grab the gun. He pointed to her hands. "You're hesitating. The Henry is a machine. It doesn't care if you're scared. If you stroke the lever halfway, the brass jams. Snap it forward, snap it back. Violent. Do it." Ruth bit her lip until it bled. Clack, clack. The action cycled smooth. "Good," Silas said. He turned to Sarah. "You're loading too slow. If there are 5 men coming through that door, you're dead before you get the 3rd round in the tube." Sarah, usually the quietest, slammed a dummy cartridge into the loading gate. I'm a seamstress, Mr. Thorne, not a soldier. You're neither, Silas said, his voice low. You're meat. Unless you learn this. He turned to Alara. She was standing by the fireplace, the rifle resting easy in her hands. She hadn't fumbled once. She watched Silas with a cold, analytical stare that unnerved him. You've held a gun before, Silas noted. I have, Alara said. Pistols? Shotgun, she corrected. Double barrel. Harder to miss. Silas nodded slowly. He walked to the fire, pouring coffee into a tin cup. The snow is settling. The crust will be hard enough to walk on by tomorrow. That's when the scout will come. The scout? Ruth asked, lowering her rifle. Calloway won't bring his whole force up the goat trail blindly, Silas explained. He's a tactician. He fought in the Shenandoah Valley campaigns. He'll send one man, a tracker, to see if I'm here, to see if I'm alone. And when he comes? Alara asked. We kill him, Silas said, quietly. That night, the silence of the cabin was broken by Alara. She sat at the table, watching Silas sharpen his Bowie knife. The rhythmic shh of the stone against steel was hypnotic. You asked who we were running from, Alara said. Silas didn't look up. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. Our parents didn't die of fever, she said. They died of debt. My father was a gambler in St. Louis, a bad one. He borrowed $2,000 from a man named Cornelius Reich. Silas paused. The knife stopped moving. Reich, the brothel king of the riverfront? The same, Alara said. When father couldn't pay, Reich's men beat him to death in the alley behind our house. Mother died of a heart attack a week later. Reich came to the funeral. He told me the debt was inherited. He said he had a way for us to work it off. Sarah shuddered by the fire, pulling her shawl tighter. He wanted to put us in his house on the river, Alara said, her voice devoid of emotion. He gave us 1 week to mourn. The night before he came to collect us, I went to his office. I told the clerk I had the money. When he let me in, she trailed off. Silas looked up, his eyes locking with hers. I didn't have the money, Alara whispered. I had father's shotgun. I didn't kill Reich. I missed, took off his ear and half his shoulder. But in the confusion, we ran. We took the first train west, then the stage. Silas stared at her. A strange expression crossed his face. It wasn't pity, it was respect. Reich is a vicious dog, Silas said. But he won't follow you here. He's a city rat. He scares easy in the open. He put a bounty on us, Alara said. $500. Alive. Silas snorted. I'm worth 10,000. Dead. Seems you girls married up. The dark humor broke the tension, just for a moment. But the reality was settling in. They were a house of fugitives, a family of killers and thieves. 2 days later, the sun broke through the clouds. The glare off the snow was blinding. Silas was up on the roof of the cabin, sweeping the valley below with a brass telescope. Alara stood at the bottom of the ladder, holding a mug of hot water. Movement, Silas said. His voice was tight. Alara climbed the ladder, ignoring the slick ice on the rungs. She lay beside him on the flat roof, peering over the snow-covered parapet. Down in the valley, a mile away, a single black dot was moving against the white. A rider. Is it them? Alara asked. He's riding a thoroughbred, Silas muttered. Not a mountain horse. That's Calloway's style. He likes pretty things that run fast. Silas handed her the telescope. Look at his saddle. Alara squinted through the glass. The rider was wrapped in furs, but the saddlebags were distinct, stamped with a symbol, a crying eye. Pinkerton. she breathed. Not just a Pinkerton, Silas said. That's a scout named Uriah Fenn. I know him. He can track a falcon on a cloudy day. If he gets within half a mile, he'll see the smoke from our chimney. He'll see the fresh chopped wood. He'll know. So we put the fire out? Ruth asked, her head poking up from the ladder. Too late, Silas said. He reached for his rifle. It wasn't the Henry. It was a Sharp's buffalo gun, a massive single-shot weapon with a barrel as long as a man's leg. It fired a bullet the size of a thumb. He's a mile out, Alara said. You can't hit a moving target at a mile. I'm not aiming for the rider, Silas said. He adjusted the vernier sight on the back of the rifle, clicking it up, calculating wind, elevation, drop. The air was thin up here. The bullet would fly flat. Silas lay prone, his cheek pressing into the stock. He breathed in. He breathed out. He held the breath. Boom! The sound was like a cannon shot. It echoed off the canyon walls, rolling down the valley like thunder. Alara watched through the telescope. A second passed. 2 seconds. 3. Down in the valley, the horse suddenly pitched forward, its chest exploding in a spray of red mist. It collapsed instantly, throwing the rider into the deep snow. You shot the horse? Sarah gasped, horrified. A man on foot in 4 feet of snow is a dead man, Silas said, reloading the Sharps with calm mechanical movements. Now, we wait. Through the glass, Alara watched the rider, Uriah Fenn, struggle out of the snowdrift. He stood up, looking around wildly. He knew where the shot had come from. He looked right up at the ridge. He didn't run. He couldn't run. The snow was waist deep. Silas tracked him with the rifle. He has a choice. He can freeze, or he can try to climb. Fenn began to wave his arms. He was shouting something, but the wind swallowed it. He's surrendering, Alara said. There's no surrender in this war, Alara, Silas said softly. If I let him live, he goes back to Callaway. He tells him the layout of the cabin. He tells him about the fence. He tells him about you. Silas shifted his aim. Don't, Alara said. She put a hand on the barrel. If we kill him like this, like a dog in the snow, we're no better than Reich. We're no better than the men chasing you. Silas looked at her. We aren't trying to be better, Alara. We're trying to be alive. Let him freeze, Alara said. Nature is cruel. You don't have to be. Silas hesitated. He looked through the scope again. Fenn was stumbling, falling, getting back up. The cold was already biting him. Night was coming. Without a horse, without shelter, he would be dead by midnight. Save the bullet, Silas muttered. He lowered the rifle. They watched until the sun went down. The black dot stopped moving. The snow began to fall again, covering the tracks, covering the body. Go inside, Silas told the women. Eat, sleep. Because tomorrow, Callaway will realize his scout isn't coming back, and he'll bring the army. The attack didn't come at dawn. It came at dinner. 3 days after the scout died, the household was eating a stew of rabbit and dried potatoes. The mood was somber. The reality of the dead man in the valley hung over them. Suddenly, the heavy wooden shutter on the east window shattered. Wood splinters sprayed across the room. A bullet whizzed past Ruth's ear and buried itself in the log wall with a dull thwack. Down! Silas roared, flipping the heavy oak table onto its side. The women scrambled behind the makeshift barricade. Another shot rang out, then another. A fusillade of lead hammered the cabin, chipping away at the chinking between the logs, smashing the lantern glass. They're on the ridge, Silas yelled, crawling toward the gun rack. "They've got the high ground." He grabbed the Henry rifles and tossed them to the women. "Load! Don't fire until you see a target." Silas grabbed his sharps and moved to a loophole, a small, angled slit cut into the logs, specifically for shooting out without being hit. He peered into the darkness. "Muzzle flashes," he muttered. "North Ridge. 300 yards. They're suppressing us." "Suppressing," Sarah cried, her hands shaking as she clutched her rifle. "Keeping our heads down so the assault team can get to the wall," Silas said. "Ilara, take the south loop. Ruth, the west. Sarah, you keep loading magazines. If they breach the door, we retreat to the mine shaft." Ilara crawled to the south wall. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked through the slit. The snow was illuminated by the pale moonlight. Shadows were moving, not 300 yards away. Close, 50 yards. Men in white coats, moving like ghosts against the snow. "They're here," Ilara screamed. "South wall. They're at the fence." "Shoot," Silas commanded. Ilara leveled the Henry. She saw a man raising an axe to chop at the perimeter posts. She didn't think about Reich. She didn't think about her father. She thought about Ruth. She pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The man in the white coat spun around and fell face first into the snow. "I got one," she whispered, shocked. "Don't celebrate. Keep firing." Silas was firing the sharps now, the boom of the big gun deafening in the enclosed space. The cabin erupted into chaos. Bullets were punching through the thinner wood of the roof, sending snow and sawdust raining down on them. Ruth was crying, but she was shooting, blindly firing out the west loop into the dark. Then a voice boomed out from the darkness. "Cease fire!" The shooting from the outside stopped instantly. The silence that followed was ringing and heavy. "Thorne!" The voice was cultured, smooth, with a southern drawl. It projected clearly through the cold air. "This is General Archibald Calloway. You have nowhere to run, son." Silas signaled for the women to stay down. He reloaded his rifle. "I have plenty of ammunition, Archie," Silas shouted back. "Come and get it." "I don't want you dead, Silas," Calloway shouted. "I want the gold. You give us the location of the Confederate bullion, and I'll let you walk away." "You have women in there, Silas. I can hear them screaming. Do you want them to die for your greed?" Ilara looked at Silas. His face was a mask of granite. "He's lying," Silas whispered to them. "He leaves no witnesses. Ever." "Send the women out, Silas," Calloway yelled. "I give you my word as an officer and a gentleman. They will be unharmed. We'll escort them to Salt Lake. This is between you and me." Sarah looked at Ilara. "Ilara, maybe." "No," Ilara said sharply. "He's a liar, Sarah. Look at his men." She pointed to the loop. The men in white coats hadn't retreated. They were creeping closer under the cover of the conversation. "They're moving up," Ilara shouted. "Fire!" Silas roared. The battle resumed with double the intensity. This time, the attackers threw dynamite. A stick of dynamite landed on the porch. The explosion shook the cabin to its foundations. Dust choked the air. The front door groaned, the hinges buckling. "They're blowing the door!" Silas yelled. "Back! Get back to the mine door!" He stood up to provide covering fire, pumping rounds out of his Henry rifle. Bang! 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 He dropped 2 men charging the porch. But then, a shot from the high ridge found its mark. It wasn't a clean shot. The bullet punched through the oak shutter and took Silas in the thigh. He grunted, a sound of pure agony, and his leg buckled. He crashed to the floor, blood instantly soaking his trousers. "Silas!" Ruth screamed. The front door splintered. An axe blade came through the wood, then a boot. The door was coming down. Silas dragged himself backward, leaving a smear of red on the floorboards. He couldn't stand. He couldn't aim. The pain was sending him into shock. "The mine!" he gasped, tossing the keys to Alara. "Lock yourselves and blow the tunnel." Alara caught the keys. She looked at the heavy, iron-banded door of the mine shaft. It was a safe room. They could hide there. But if they hid there, they were trapped. Calloway would just smoke them out or bury them alive. She looked at the front door. It was buckling with every blow of the axe. She could see the face of a man through the splintered wood, a bearded, grinning face. She looked at her sisters. Sarah was paralyzed. Ruth was sobbing. Alara realized then that no one was coming to save them. Silas was down. The sheriff hated them. God was watching from a distance. She didn't run to the mine. She ran to the crate Silas had shown her that first night, the dynamite. "Sarah, help me," Alara screamed. She grabbed a bundle of dynamite, 3 sticks taped together with a short fuse. "Alara, what are you doing?" Sarah shrieked. "Light it," Alara commanded, holding the fuse out to the fireplace embers. Sarah, shaking, grabbed a burning twig and touched it to the fuse. It sputtered and hissed, sparking violently. Alara turned to the front door. The axe smashed through the lock. The door swung open. 3 men surged in, howling, pistols raised. Alara didn't hesitate. She screamed, a primal, terrifying sound, and hurled the bundle of dynamite right at their feet. "Fire in the hole!" she yelled, diving behind the overturned table and dragging Silas down with her. The men in the doorway had a split second to realize their mistake. One of them tried to kick it back out. Kaboom! The front of the cabin disintegrated. The blast wave lifted the heavy log roof 3 inches before it slammed back down. The 3 men were vaporized in a flash of orange light and splintered wood. The pressure wave blew out every lantern, plunging the room into darkness and ringing silence. For a long minute, no one moved. Then Alara coughed, waving away the acrid smoke. The entire front wall of the cabin was gone. A gaping hole looked out onto the snow. Outside, the shooting had stopped. The violence of the explosion had stunned everyone. "Is everyone alive?" Alara choked out. "I'm here," Ruth whispered from under a pile of blankets. "I'm here," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. Silas groaned. Alara crawled to him. He was pale, his eyes rolling back. He was losing too much blood. "You crazy woman." Silas wheezed, a faint smile on his lips. "You blew my front porch off." "I bought us time," Alara said, tearing a strip from her petticoat to tie a tourniquet around his leg. She pulled it tight, ignoring his cry of pain. "Listen to me," Silas gasped, grabbing her wrist. His grip was weak. "Calloway, he won't attack again tonight. He's shocked. He thinks I have a cannon, but he'll burn us out at dawn. Then we leave," Alara said. "I can't walk," Silas said. "You take the girls. Go out the back way through the mine ventilation shaft. It comes out on the north face." "No," Alara said. She finished the knot. She wiped the blood from her hands onto her dress. She stood up and walked to the gaping hole in the cabin. The cold wind rushed in. She picked up Silas's fallen Henry rifle. She jacked the lever, chambering a fresh round. "We aren't leaving," Alara said, looking out at the ring of campfires that were starting to flicker in the tree line. "And we aren't hiding in a hole." She turned back to her sisters. The fear was gone from her eyes. In its place was something cold and hard, something she had borrowed from the mountain. Sarah, get the medical kit. Ruth, reload every gun we have. Silas is the bait. We are the trap. The wind on Dead Man's Ridge had a voice. It shrieked through the gaps in the blown-out cabin, carrying with it the freezing bite of the Montana winter. But inside the ruins of the fortress, the cold was the least of their worries. Silas was fading. The blood loss from the thigh wound had turned his skin the color of old parchment. He lay propped up against the stone hearth, his breathing shallow and wet. Sarah knelt beside him, her hands covered in his blood. She had been a seamstress in St. Louis, stitching silk and lace. Now she was stitching flesh. She heated a needle in the fire, her face pale but determined, and drove it through the jagged edges of the bullet wound. Silas gritted his teeth, a low growl escaping his throat, but he didn't pull away. "You have hands like a surgeon," Silas rasped, his eyes fluttering open. "I have hands like a dressmaker," Sarah corrected, tying off the suture. "You're just another torn coat, Mr. Thorne." "Keep him awake," Ilara ordered, from the darkness near the shattered entrance. She was peering out into the night, the Henry rifle tucked into her shoulder. If he sleeps, he might not wake up. Ilara turned back to the room. The explosion had bought them an hour of silence, but Calloway wasn't gone. He was regrouping. He was angry, and an angry commander makes mistakes. "Ruth," Ilara said. The youngest sister stepped out of the shadows. She looked different. The terrified girl who had clutched a doll on the stagecoach was gone. In her place was a ghost. She had rubbed soot from the fireplace over her face to dull the shine of her skin. She wore a white woolen blanket, like a poncho, rendering her nearly invisible against the snow. "I'm ready," Ruth said. "You know what to do?" Ilara asked. "I go to the tree line," Ruth recited. "I plant the charges. I don't engage. I don't shoot unless they see me. I come back. If they see you?" Ilara's voice cracked, just for a second. "They won't," Ruth said. She picked up a canvas sack heavy with dynamite sticks. She had tied nails and jagged pieces of scrap metal around them with twine, shrapnel charges. "Go," Ilara whispered. Ruth slipped out through the hole in the wall, dissolving into the white void of the blizzard. Inside, the waiting began. Silas watched Ilara. She was pacing, checking the load on the pistols, moving with a nervous electric energy. "You're sending a child to fight a war," Silas whispered. "I'm sending a soldier," Ilara shot back. "You told us survival was the only rule. I'm following your rules, Silas." "I never wanted this for you," he murmured. I just wanted peace." "There is no peace for people like us," Ilara said, crouching beside him. "Not for you, with your stolen gold. Not for us, with Reich's bounty on our heads. We don't get peace, Silas. We just get to choose how we die." 20 minutes passed. The silence was agonizing. Then a sound, the crunch of snow. Ilara raised the rifle. A figure emerged from the white. It was Ruth. She scrambled over the debris, breathing hard, her eyes wide. "They're coming," she gasped. "Not from the front. They're circling around to the blind side, the cliff edge. They're going to rappel down the chimney." "Clever," Silas groaned. "Smoke us out?" "Did you plant the charges?" Ilara asked. "Yes, by the big pine, and along the fence line." "Good," Ilara said. "Sarah, get Silas to the mine door. Drag him if you have to." "Ilara, no," Silas protested, trying to rise. "I fight with you." "You can't stand, you stubborn old bear," Ilara yelled. "Get to the door. You're the only one who can open it." Sarah hooked her arms under Silas's shoulders. He was heavy, dead weight, but adrenaline gave her strength. She dragged him across the floor toward the heavy iron-banded door at the back of the cabin. Ilara and Ruth took positions behind the overturned heavy oak table. "Wait for it," Ilara whispered. Outside, the wind changed. The sound of voices drifted in. Men's voices, confident, low. "Easy now, watch your footing." They were right outside the breach. "Go!" Ilara screamed. She didn't shoot at the men. She shot at the tree line. She aimed for the spot Ruth had pointed out, the base of the massive ponderosa pine, where the white coats were using the trunk for cover. Crack! The bullet hit the bundle of dynamite Ruth had taped to the bark. The explosion was blinding. It wasn't just a boom. It was a shredding force. The nails and scrap metal turned into a swarm of supersonic hornets. Screams erupted from the darkness. The tree, sheared at the base, groaned and toppled, crashing down onto the men hiding behind it. "Flank left! Flank left!" a voice screamed, Calloway's voice. "Now the fence!" Ilara commanded. Ruth fired. She missed. Her hands were shaking. "Again!" Ilara yelled, firing her own rifle to keep the men pinned down. Ruth took a breath. She aimed at the fence post, where a bundle of red sticks was visible against the wood. Bang! The second explosion ripped a hole in the perimeter fence, sending splinters flying like javelins. The attackers who were climbing over the fence were thrown backward into the snow. It was chaos. The carefully disciplined Pinkerton agents broke rank. They were fighting shadows, exploding trees, and a fury they hadn't expected. But there were too many of them. Through the smoke, Ilara saw them advancing. They weren't walking anymore. They were rushing. A wave of 10 men, bayonets fixed, charging the breach. "Retreat!" Ilara screamed. "To the mine!" Ilara fired wildly, dropping the lead man, but she didn't wait to see him fall. She grabbed Ruth by the collar and hauled her backward. Sarah had the mine door open. It revealed a pitch-black maw, a tunnel hewn directly into the rock. The smell of damp earth and stale air rushed out. Silas was slumped just inside the tunnel entrance. "Get in! Get in!" Sarah shrieked. Ruth dove into the dark. Ilara followed, spinning around to fire one last shot at the doorway. A Pinkerton agent burst into the cabin, his face twisted in rage. He raised his pistol. Ilara slammed the heavy iron door shut. Clang! The bullet sparked harmlessly off the iron bands a split second after the latch fell. Ilara threw the heavy deadbolt. Then she dropped the iron bar across the brackets. They were safe. But as the adrenaline faded, the crushing reality set in. The darkness was absolute. "Matches!" Silas's voice came from the floor. "Left pocket." Ilara fumbled in the dark until she found his coat. She struck a match. The flare of light revealed the tunnel. It was narrow, supported by rotting timbers. It sloped downward, deep into the belly of the mountain. They could hear the men outside pounding on the iron door. The thuds were dull and distant. "They can't get in," Silas wheezed. "That door is 4 inches of solid oak and iron. It would take a cannon to breach it." "They don't need to get in," Ilara said, looking at the thin trickle of smoke seeping through the cracks of the door frame. "They're going to burn the cabin down. They're going to roast us in here." "No," Silas said. He sounded strangely calm. "The draft pulls out of the mine, not in. The fire won't reach us. But we can't stay here." "Where does this tunnel go?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Down," Silas said, "to the treasure." He looked at Ilara, his eyes glittering in the matchlight. "Help me up. It's time you saw what you're dying for." The descent was a nightmare. The tunnel spiraled deep into the earth, the sounds of the battle above fading into a heavy, sulphurous silence. Ilara and Sarah supported the wounded Silas, dragging him down the loose shale until the narrow passage opened into a vast natural cavern. In the center lay a stagnant black pool. Stacked against the far wall were dozens of crates branded with the seal of the Confederate States Army. "Is that it?" Ruth whispered, holding the lantern high. "The gold." "Open one," Silas rasped, collapsing onto a flat rock. Ilara pried the lid off the nearest crate. She stared, confused. It wasn't gold. It was paper. Thousands of documents wrapped in oilcloth. "Ledgers," Ilara said, turning to Silas. "Maps, receipts." "Gold can be spent," Silas said, his voice echoing in the gloom. "But that is leverage." He gestured to the crates. General Calloway didn't just steal gold. He used it to bribe officials, buy land, and sell out his own troops for profit. Those papers prove he's a traitor to both sides. If they get out, he hangs. Ilara looked at the papers. The weight of them was immense. Calloway wasn't here for money. He was here to erase his past. "He sent me to hide it 10 years ago," Silas explained. "But I read the books. I stole them instead. I've been waiting for the right time to use them." "And now?" Ilara asked. "Now we burn them," Silas said, pulling a stick of dynamite from his coat. "Calloway is coming. He thinks we're trapped. He'll come down personally to verify the papers are here, and when he does, we blow the tunnel." "You want to bury us alive?" Sarah gasped. "No," Silas said. He pointed to a fissure high up on the cavern wall. "Ventilation shaft. It goes straight to the peak. It's tight, but you three can fit." "And you?" Ilara asked softly. Silas smiled grimly, looking at his shattered leg. "I can't climb, Ilara. I stay. I guard the bait until Calloway gets here. Then I light the fuse." "No," Ilara said. "We don't leave you." "You have to," Silas snapped. "I bought you to work. This is the work. You survive." Suddenly, a metallic screech echoed down the tunnel. The iron door at the top of the shaft had been breached. "They're in," Silas whispered. "You have 10 minutes. Go." Sarah and Ruth ran for the wall, scrambling up toward the vent, but Ilara didn't follow. She walked to the crates and shoved a handful of ledgers into her satchel. "Insurance," she muttered. "Ilara, go," Silas pleaded. "I'm done running, Silas," she said, kneeling beside him and checking her rifle. "Calloway won't come alone. If you blow the tunnel too early, they'll dig him out. If you wait too long, they'll shoot you before you can light the fuse. You need a partner." She looked at him, the fear in her eyes replaced by a cold resolve. "I'll hold them off. You strike the match." From the darkness of the tunnel, torchlight flickered. Voices echoed, confident, angry voices. "Thorne!" General Calloway's voice boomed down the shaft. "I'm coming for my property." Ilara racked the lever of her Henry rifle, aiming into the dark. "Welcome to hell, General," she whispered. The cavern was silent, save for the rhythmic dripping of water. Silas sat against the rock, bleeding heavily, a lucifer match in one hand and a stick of dynamite in the other. Behind a stack of crates, Ilara Vance pressed her cheek to her empty rifle, praying. General Calloway entered the torchlit chamber flanked by 4 Pinkerton enforcers. He ignored the gold bars, heading straight for the crates of documents, the evidence of his treason. "I thought you were dead, Silas," Calloway sneered, seizing a bundle of ledgers. "But I suppose a dog always returns to its vomit." He leveled his heavy Lamat revolver at Silas's chest. "Where are the women?" "Gone," Silas lied, his voice a wet rattle. "Halfway to Bannock." "Pity," Calloway said, cocking the hammer. "Goodbye, Sergeant." "Now," Silas whispered. Ilara burst from cover. Her rifle cracked, dropping the agent to Calloway's right. Chaos erupted. The cavern magnified the gunshots into a deafening roar. Ilara pumped the lever, dropping a second man, but the remaining agents returned fire, splintering the crates around her. She ran dry. Before she could reload, a massive enforcer slammed her against the wall, pinning her throat with a crushing grip. Calloway kicked the wounded Silas onto his back. "A valiant effort," the general laughed, standing over him. "But you were always a second too slow." He aimed at Silas's heart. "Any last words?" Silas looked past Calloway, his eyes locking on the open crate of dynamite at the general's feet. "Yeah," Silas coughed. "Duck." A thunderous boom rang out, not from Ilara, but from high above. Ruth had climbed back down the ventilation shaft. Perched on a ledge 30 feet up, she fired the massive Sharps buffalo rifle. The bullet didn't hit a man. It hit the crate of dynamite. The world turned white. The explosion vaporized Calloway and his men instantly, shattering the cavern's stone support pillars. The mountain gave a deep, tectonic groan. "The roof!" Ilara screamed, thrown free by the blast. "It's coming down!" She crawled through the dust to Silas. He was pinned under a fallen slab, life fading fast. "Go!" Silas gasped, pushing her hand away. "The girl saved us. Don't let her die." "I'm not leaving you," Ilara sobbed. "You have to," he whispered, a faint smile touching his lips. "My real name was James. Tell them James stood his ground." With a final, heart-wrenching look, Ilara scrambled up the rock wall toward Ruth's outstretched hand. They squeezed into the narrow ventilation shaft just as the cavern ceiling gave way. Thousands of tons of granite crashed down, burying the gold, the general, and James forever. The sisters burst out onto the snowy peak of Dead Man's Ridge, just as the ground beneath them shook one last time. Silence returned to the Bitterroots. Sarah, shivering in the snow, hugged them tightly. "Is it over?" Ilara sat up, wiping blood and soot from her face. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the bundle of ledgers she had stolen before the fight. They had the leverage now. They had the power. "Yes," Ilara said, her eyes hard as iron. "It's over. Now, we go after Reich." The sisters didn't disappear. They conquered. They moved to San Francisco, using the stolen leverage to build an empire. Ilara became a shipping magnate, Sarah a fashion icon, and Ruth a renowned frontier photographer. Ilara never remarried. She wore a locket until the day she died, containing not a portrait, but a small, charred piece of granite. And locals say that when the October wind howls through the ruins of Deadman's Ridge, you can still hear the phantom sound of a Henry rifle racking around for the ghost of the man who held the line. In the end, Ilara and her sisters didn't just survive the winter, they conquered it. The treasure of Dead Man's Ridge wasn't the gold in the ground, but the bond forged in the dark. General Calloway thought he was fighting 3 helpless women, but he forgot the most dangerous law of the wild. The female wolf is always deadlier than the male when protecting her pack. What do you think? Did Silas redeem himself in the end? And would you have burned the papers, or kept them like Ilara did? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single theory. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please do me a huge favor. Hit that like button. It helps get these stories to more people. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring that notification bell. We release new, true crime-style Western sagas every week, and you don't want to miss the next one. Until next time, keep your powder dry and watch your back trail.